Hello, welcome to Cardboard History. I'm David. Today I want to do a video response for Dan at Old Sarge Collects, who is celebrating reaching the 300 subscriber milestone. Congratulations, Dan. Dan challenged us to share our two favorite MLB teams and the origin story of how those became our favorite teams and some cards, including our favorite card of that team. Now, for me, if you've watched any of my videos, you know I am a Cubs fan. So for me, first team was really easy to figure out. Maybe the hardest part of this VR was figuring out who actually is my second favorite team, because I don't have any other teams that I really follow in baseball that closely. I narrowed it down to four. Two of them are the Reds and the Indians, and those are just kind of my homer teams. I'm in Ohio, but I'm about 3 hours from Cincinnati, 3 hours from Cleveland, so not really close enough to attend a whole lot of games. And they're teams that I'll root for if I'm watching, but not necessarily teams that I collect. The other two teams that made my top five, I guess I would put in third place, is the Rangers. The reason for that is because for about 4 years I lived in Dallas. For a year and a half I actually lived in Arlington, about a mile away from the stadium, and so I attended a handful of games and watched the Rangers and enjoyed that and have fond memories of living in Dallas and cheering on the Rangers during that time whenever I would attend games there. But the team that I would decide to go with for my number two team was the Seattle Mariners. And for me, this really goes back probably for collecting to when I was my 10, 12, 13 years old. And I have family that lives out in Seattle. And so I remember taking a trip out to Seattle and just loving being out in Seattle, loving the city, the Space Needle, going to see the Mariners play, going to see the ocean, and just kind of how everything was there. It was just a really enjoyable time that always stuck with me. And at one point I was determined I was eventually going to move to Seattle and live out there. But that didn't come to be. But during that time, while I was primarily still a Cubs fan, I also really enjoyed the Mariners. And so I have a few cards from those days of collecting when I held on to some Mariners cards, and a few a little bit more modern. I'll turn around my camera now and share some of my favorite Mariners cards in my collection. So the first card that really comes to mind is Edgar Martinez, and I just remember my aunt and uncle and cousin that lived out in Seattle being huge fans of Edgar Martinez, and so I found this card of his in my collection. And then the next that I found is this, it was a team set, and I think I may have gotten this when I went to a Mariners game and got it from the stadium, but there were players from the team, and I don't have the full team set. I have like maybe half of the set, but it did include this Ichiro, which this is a second year card for Ichiro, and also a team leaders card. So this was 2002, second year for Ichiro. Then a couple of modern cards here. These I've just picked up from opening product. So I have a couple Julio cards. He's just so much fun to watch. He's got so much joyfulness just all over his face whenever he plays. You can tell he just really loves the game. So a couple of player worn relic, a manufactured relic, and then his rookie card. And this John Olerud is probably my favorite Mariners card. And this is something that I've had in my collection since 2000. And I don't remember where I got it, if it was something that I traded for or maybe picked up at a card show when I was younger. But I had held on to it and kept it in a top loader until today when I took it out. It was in a pretty worn out top loader that had seen better days. But the reason why I'd held on to it is because it is numbered out of 50. So something from 2000, when every set didn't have a ton of numbered cards, getting something numbered to 50 was probably the lowest numbered card that I had in my collection for a long time. So I'd have to put this as my favorite Mariners card, just because of it staying in my collection this whole time. Now, when it comes to my favorite team, the origin story goes back a little bit farther, and it actually in my family goes back really far. So I remember growing up, I grew up in Ohio, but my mom was from Illinois, and she had moved to Ohio to go to college, and that's when she met my dad. And every summer we would go to Illinois for a week or two to stay at my grandma's house. They lived on a huge cattle farm, and it was just kind of always a fun trip that we looked forward to every summer. And I have very vivid memories of remembering watching my grandpa watch a baseball game. I remember being really confused when the Cubs were playing, and then the next day they were playing the exact same team again, and I didn't understand at first. I asked my grandpa, I'm like, why are they playing the same team? They just played them. Shouldn't they be playing somebody else? And that's when I realized that baseball was played in series, and you played 3 or 4 games at a time against a team and then moved on to the next one. So I remember my grandpa being an avid Cubs fan, and that passed on to my mother, who's also a Cubs fan, and really kind of shared that love of baseball with me. And I always enjoyed all sports growing up, so it was kind of a connecting point for us. And I remember watching live the Bartman game, and watching kind of all of the struggles of the Cubs through the years, and just knowing that it was a way that I connected with my grandfather. When the Cubs won the World Series in 2016, that was probably one of the things at the forefront of my mind, was wishing that my grandpa was still alive to see that. And just knowing that that was kind of a connecting point that I have with him, even though he's no longer with us. And really in my family, I came across a really unique article after my grandfather's brother passed away 2 years ago, and he had collected a lot of artifacts from the family history. I really enjoy genealogy, and so something that I came across in there really stood out to me. It was this newspaper, and I'll turn the camera around so you can hopefully get a little bit better look at this. So this is a newspaper, and if I can get it closer here, from October 24th, 1907. And this is from the Pontiac Weekly Leader. And Pontiac's a small town really close to where my grandparents live, and it's maybe an hour and a half south of Chicago. And this was right after the Cubs won their World Series in 1907. They came down to play the Pontiac team. And the reason this newspaper was in with all my family's belongings is because on the other side is a story about Mrs. Rogie, who was my great-great-great-grandmother. This is the story of how she died in her 80s. She was moving some flour and straw around, and it caught fire and caught her clothes on fire. And it was in the newspaper the same day, right before the Cubs came to town to play. And so this is kind of an interesting piece for me because it connects my family history and my love of genealogy. And I'm actually going to do, I'm going to put out another episode here looking at this newspaper. There's a couple other interesting articles in here that just show some of the things that were going on with baseball at the time. But for me, this kind of shows a little bit about how I ended up becoming a Cubs fan. And with a lot of other teams that I root for in football, I'm a Patriots fan, and that just goes back to me liking the Patriots in the 90s, and there's not really any family ties there. Or in hockey, I root for the Canucks, and no other reason other than really kind of my connection with Seattle and my love of the Pacific Northwest. And when I started rooting for hockey, there was not a team in Seattle. But for baseball, it really goes back to my family. So I wanted to share a few cards here, and I thought I would start by showing off some of the Cubs teams cards. And this whole activity, I got out the run of Cubs cards from 1956 through 71. And I just want to share some of them and some of the interesting things that I found. So this is the first team card for the Cubs. And when they put out team cards, 56 was the first year that they did that. This usually just took the team's pictures. It's nice that they have the names here. And and it's, very much the same year after year with different players. This is the 57, and it was always the picture from the year before. So this 1958 team card pictured the team from 1957. And you'd also get all the coaches in there. The traveling secretary is the one in the suit, the equipment manager, and also the trainer would typically be in these cards as well. So it's kind of a way that the other people that were part of the team could be pictured with the team and have their own card. Now, when it gets to 1960, this card is pretty normal. It's the 1960 Topps picture of the 1959 team. In 1961, this picture, I was not able to find where this picture came from. And it's the exact same picture that they used in 62. So I'm assuming this was some version of the 1960 Chicago Cubs team. But as you can tell, they just used the same picture and put it on a different background. But where things really get a little strange is what Topps decided to do in 1963. This is the Cubs team card from 1963, using the exact same picture from 1960. So this must have just been a great team picture that they decided in 1963 that they were going to bring it back and once again use the picture from the 1959 team. Not only that, they used the same picture in 1964 and in 1965. So for some reason, Topps' laziness or whatever it was, just decided to use the exact same team picture for 4 years, not even 4 years in a row. So in 1965, your Cubs team card of the lowly 8th place Chicago Cubs contained only a handful of players that were still with the team. Of the 24 players in this picture, only 2 of them played on the 1965 Cubs team. That would be Ernie Banks right there and George Altman up in the corner. None of the coaches were still with the team, but there were still a few people. The traveling secretary, Don Blabel, was still with the team. The equipment manager, Yash Kawano, and also the trainer, who's right there, that is Al Schuneman. They were still with the team. And what's really interesting is in this run of Cubs cards that I'm going to show, going all the way up to 71, there are only 2 people that appear in every single team picture. The first is Ernie Banks, which makes sense. He was Mr. Cub after all. The second is the equipment manager, Yash Kawano, who is this shorter Asian man on the end. And he appears in every picture. Al Schuneman appears in every picture except for one, which is I believe, 67. He doesn't appear, 1970. He doesn't appear in 1970 because the 1969 team picture, he was a floating head. He wasn't there for picture day. So Yash Kawano and Ernie Banks are the only 2 people that appear on every card. And on this card, other than the 2 players, also Al Dark in the front was also still with the Cubs, but he was a coach and not a player anymore. Another interesting little tidbit, if we bring it up, there is an elderly gentleman who sits right here, and that just happens to be one Rogers Hornsby, who was a coach that year for the Cubs in 1959, and appears on all 4 of these team cards, sitting there in the second row. So I realized that today when I was looking through these that actually I have a couple more Rogers Hornsby cards that feature his image from his time as a coach. Then finally in 1966, we get a new team card. So new picture. This was from the 1964 team, so it's 2 years behind. And on this card, I actually do have the Topps and also the Venezuelan version. The primary difference you can tell is the darker paper stock on the Venezuelan, and then also on the back. The Venezuelan is a lot a deeper of a red. I got a few other Venezuelans that I pulled out. So these three are O-Peachy, and they all say printed in Canada for Jim Stewart, Bob Hendley, and Bob Buell. And then the Venezuelans on the back say printed in the USA, but they're Venezuelan. This one, Bob Humphreys, is really interesting. For some reason, on the typical Topps card, it does say printed in the USA, but on the Venezuelan, there is no copyright or printing mark on it. So these are the Venezuelans, and you can tell the darker stock on these. Usually they're in a lot rougher shape because it's a thinner card stock, and they would get pasted into albums, so a lot of times there will be glue marks and paper loss on the back. But on the team card, this is the only Venezuelan team card that I have from this year. Then moving on from 66, the 67 team card, and then Topps took a break for 2 years and came back in 1970. This is the card that doesn't picture Al Schuneman in the if you look at their actually like press release team photo, he's a floating head that's up here that they took out for the picture to go on the card. And then after this, we get to the fun floating heads, and this is the first year where Yash Kawana was not pictured on the card. And so this is as far as I went with the team run for showing here, mostly just through the 50s and 60s with a couple of 70s cards. But to me, it's really interesting just to look at the makeup of these teams. It's unfortunate that Topps was lazy and didn't actually get the team photo for each year, but that's what they did. Now I want to show what I would place as probably my favorite 3 or 4 cards from that belong to the Cubs. I guess 3 cards and one other item. The first is this ticket. This was 2002, and my parents took me and my brothers and sister to a Cubs game for my birthday at Wrigley Field, and this was signed by Mike Mahoney, who was a catcher. And this is back in the day when at Wrigley Field the bullpen was still along the foul line, so the backup catchers would all kind of hang out along there, and we were right along the third base line, and so we got to interact with him a little bit. And I just recently found this again right around Christmas. I came over for actually our Christmas family dinner. My dad said, "Hey, look what I found in the basement," and he pulled out a pile of cards, and it was a lot of things that I had, autographs and things that I had kind of set away as separate, some early Kobe Bryant cards, a LeBron James. It was from his rookie year, but not his like typical rookie card, so it was still a nice card. And this was in there as well, and I remember getting this signed, and eventually looked up to remember who this guy was. But we have pictures of him signing this ticket for me when I was young, and kind of being there right along the third base line. And so this is a great memory for me of going to a Cubs game. The next picture is something from 2023 Topps, and this is Christopher Morell. He is my favorite player on the Cubs right now. I just love his exuberance, how much joy he has playing the game. He always seems to be smiling and just, having the best day ever. And I feel like this picture really captures it. This is the Golden Mirror variation super short print from 2023 Topps. So this is his rookie card super short print. And I also love this card because it's a picture from the Field of Dreams game from 2022 when the Cubs and the Reds played. And growing up on farms out in the country, played baseball around a lot of cornfields, and so just the atmosphere of this game was something that was really cool to watch, and just love the historic element to it. And so this is my favorite card of Christopher Morell, and he's my favorite player on the teams right now. But when it went to my favorite card, it's really 2, and I put these together because they're really from within minutes of each other. And it is the Topps Now card from Chris Bryant throwing the final out, getting the assist to Anthony Rizzo. And I just remember watching this and watching Bryant field the final ground ball to win the World Series. And even before he got the ball in his glove, he had this huge grin on his face. and tosses the ball over to Rizzo. And then before Rizzo can jump up and celebrate, he throws the ball in his back pocket so he doesn't lose it. And then in the moments that ensue, the celebration. And so this was just a special moment for me watching. I was living in Dallas at the time and watching it with my wife. And I just remember watching this game, and when the rain delay happened, it was midnight, it was getting late, and just knowing that, like, I have to stay up. I can't go to sleep. Game 7 in the World Series, looking at going into extra innings and just, not knowing what's going to happen, and hardly being able to sleep that night afterwards. But this was just a great memory, and these aren't, necessarily the most valuable Cubs cards in my collection, or the ones, the oldest. But the story that these tell are just a story of waiting a long time for victory. To be able to celebrate a World Series after 108 years of waiting. And hopefully it won't be another 108 years. I'm really excited with the team that the Cubs are putting together this year. We'll see if they make any other additions. But just love looking at the history of the Cubs and watching them play as much as I can, or listening to them on the radio is just a fun time while I'm working to have the game on in the background. So I thank you to Old Sarge Collects, Dan, for putting this VR out there. It was fun to dig into the team cards a little bit and learn some things that I didn't know, and just fun to also kind of reminisce. I'll put out a video here probably tomorrow about the newspaper and look at that a little bit more. I just think it's a really cool piece and maybe one of my favorite parts of my collection. Thank you all for watching Cardboard History.